You know there's something rather strange that happens when you begin to wake up. And by wake up, I don't mean just opening your eyes in the morning or having a nice cup of coffee. I mean when you really begin to see through the game, when the curtain of normal thinking starts to move and you catch a peek of what's actually going on here. It's quite wonderful, really. But here's the thing that nobody tells you. Once you've had that peek, once you've tasted that freedom, there are certain things you simply cannot share. Not because they're secret in some magical, quiet way, but because sharing them would be like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. It just doesn't work. And more than that, trying to do so can actually create more confusion than understanding. So let me tell you about 5 things that if you are spiritually awake, you should never share. Not out of spiritual pride, not because you're part of some special club, but simply because these things cannot be shared in the way that normal information can be shared. They're more like the smell of a flower. You can describe it all day long, but until someone smells it for themselves, they haven't really got it. Now, the first thing you must never share is your direct experience of waking up itself. You see, the moment you wake up, there's this huge urge to tell everyone about it. You want to grab people by the shoulders and say, look, I've seen it. It's all right here. We've been looking in the wrong direction the whole time. But what happens when you do this? The other person looks at you with a mix of confusion and worry. They nod nicely. They might even say that's wonderful for you. But inside they're thinking you've gone a bit strange. Why is this? Because waking up is not an idea. It's not a thought that can be passed from one mind to another like a recipe for bread. It's a real-life thing. It's the difference between reading about swimming and actually being in the water. When you try to describe the water to someone who's never been wet, what do they hear? Just words, just sounds. The actual feeling of water, the way it holds you, the way it moves around your body that cannot be caught in words. I once knew a man who had what you might call a deep spiritual experience. He was walking in the garden one evening and suddenly everything became see-through. He saw that he was not a separate person walking through a garden, but rather the whole process of gardening was happening. There was no walker and no garden, just walking, gardening as one movement. Well, he was so excited by this that he rushed to tell his wife, and what did she say? She said, "That's nice, dear. Don't forget to take out the trash." You see, she couldn't get what he was trying to give because she hadn't had the experience. It's like trying to explain the color red to someone who was born blind. You can talk about light waves. You can describe how it makes you feel, but you cannot give them the direct experience of redness, and spiritual waking up is far more hard to explain than even that. So what happens when you keep trying to share this experience? You begin to sound like you're showing off. Oh, I've had this wonderful insight. I've seen the truth. I understand what life is really about. And right away, you've created a split. You've put yourself over here as the awake one and the other person over there as the not awake one. And in doing so, you've actually gone against the very insight you were trying to share, which is that there is no split, no separation, no you and them. The awake person learns to be quiet about their waking up, not out of fake modesty, but because they understand that talking about it is like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is useful if someone wants to look where it's pointing, but if they're interested in the finger itself, they'll miss the moon completely. And most people, when you try to share your waking up, become interested in your finger. They want to know what you did to get awake. They want the technique, theme, the secret practice. But waking up didn't happen because you did something. It happened when you stopped doing and simply saw what was already there. The second thing you must never share is the specific practices or methods that worked for you. Now, this might sound confusing. Surely, if something worked for you, wouldn't it be helpful to tell others? But here's the trick. What worked for you worked because it was right for you at that specific moment in your life. It fit your personality, your situation, your specific type of confusion. Imagine you have a headache and you take ascertain medicine and the headache goes away. Does this mean everyone with a headache should take that same medicine? Of course not. One person's headache might be from stress, another's from not sleeping enough, another's from not drinking enough water. The same medicine won't work for all of them. In fact, it might hurt some of them. Spiritual practices are exactly like this. What brings one person to clarity might trap another person in trying too hard. I might sit quietly and watch my breath, and in that watching suddenly see through the trick of the separate self. But if I tell you you must sit and watch your breath, you might spend years sitting and watching and getting absolutely nowhere because your specific problem is different from mine. There was a student who came to Heist's teacher and said, "Teacher, I've been meditating for 5 years just as you told me, and I still haven't had any waking up." The teacher laughed and said, "Perhaps you should stop meditating." The student was shocked. "But you told me to meditate." "Yes," said the teacher. "And now I'm telling you to stop. You've turned meditation into another form of trying hard, another way of trying to become something you think you're not. Stop trying to be awake and see if you're not already awake. You see, the moment you give someone a method, they turn it into a goal. They think if I do this practice correctly, I will get enlightenment. And now they're further from waking up than when they started because they've created a future moment when they imagine they'll be complete. But waking up is not in the future. It's only now. It's seeing what's already here, not creating something new. The third thing you must never share are your insights about other people. When you wake up, one of the things that happens is you begin to see people very clearly. You see through their masks, their acts, their games. You can see when someone is working from fear, when they're protecting an image, when they're lost in their own story. And there's a huge want to help them by pointing this out. But this is almost always a mistake. Why? Because people are not ready to see themselves until they're ready. And when they're ready, they'll see it themselves. They don't need you to tell them. In fact, if you tell them before they're ready, you'll only create pushing back and anger. Think about it this way. Suppose you see a butterfly struggling to come out of its cocoon. You think, "Oh, I can't help. I'll cut open the cocoon and free the butterfly." But if you do this, the butterfly will die. Why? Because the struggle to come out is what makes its wings strong. Without that struggle, it cannot fly. In the same way, people need to struggle with their own confusions in their own time. Your helpful insight given before they're ready for it might actually hurt them. I remember sitting with a friend who was going on and on about how unfairly he'd been treated to this work. He'd been passed over for a raise, and he was sure it was because his boss had something against him. Now I could see quite clearly what was actually happening. My friend had ascertained pride, a way of ignoring others' ideas that made him hard to work with. This was the real reason he wasn't promoted. But did I tell him this? No, because he wasn't asking to see himself clearly. He was asking for someone to agree with his victim story. If I'd said, "Actually, you're rather proud and dismissive," what would have happened? He would have gotten defensive. He might have ended our friendship, and he still wouldn't have seen the truth because he wasn't ready to see it. So instead, I listened. I made understanding noises, and then months later, without any pushing. From me, he suddenly said, "I think I might have been a bit hard to work with there." It was the insight. Came up in him naturally. When he was ready for it, the awake person learns to trust this natural process. They don't rush around trying to enlighten everyone they understand. That awareness wakes up in its own time like a flower opening in the morning. You cannot force the petals open. You can only provide the right conditions and then step back. The fourth thing you must never share is your experience of the void, the emptiness, the basic groundlessness of life. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing to share because it can be deeply scary to someone who isn't ready for it. You see, when you really wake up, one of the things you see is that there's nothing solid anywhere. Everything you thought was permanent and real turns out to be more like a dance, a flow, a process. Your own sense of self, which feels so solid and lasting, is actually more like a river. You can say there's a river, but if you try to grab it, you get nothing but water passing through your fingers. The river is not a thing, it's a happening. Now, this understanding can be incredibly freeing. It means you're not stuck being who you think you are. It means all your problems, all your worries, all your carefully built identities are like clouds passing through the sky. Boto, someone who hasn't seen this yet. It sounds terrifying. It sounds like you're saying nothing matters, that everything is meaningless, that we're all just random collections of atoms bouncing around with no purpose. I once made the mistake of trying to explain this to a coworker. We were having dinner and he was talking about his plans for the future, all the things he wanted to achieve, the person he wanted to become. And I said rather stupidly, you know, there really is no you to achieve anything. What you call yourself is just a pattern, a habit of thought. It's not real in the way you think it's real. Well, he looked at me as if I'd just said I was going to rob a bank. What are you talking about? I said, of course I'm real. I'm sitting right here. I have thoughts, feelings, memories. How can you say I'm not real? And then he became quite upset. He thought I was saying he didn't exist, saying his life was meaningless. What I was actually trying to say is that he's real, but not in the way he imagines. He's not a separate alone self trapped in a bag of skin. He's the whole universe showing itself as a specific pattern called him. But he couldn't hear this because it threatened his whole sense of identity. And without a stable sense of identity, he felt he would fall apart. This is why the great teachers throughout history have been very careful about who they share the deepest teachings with. They understood that these teachings are like medicine. In the right amount, at the right time, they heal. In the wrong amount, at the wrong time, they poison. The truth about emptiness, about the void, about the groundlessness of life. This truth must be approached slowly, gently, or it can break someone's world before they have the ability to rebuild it. And the fifth thing you must never share is your sense of complete freedom and why you no longer feel bound by normal rules and morality. When you wake up, you see that all the rules, all the shoulds and shouldn'ts, all the moral codes and social agreements are just agreements, games we've all decided to play. And you realize you're free to play or not play as you choose. But if you tell this to people, if you say I'm beyond good and evil, I no longer follow normal morality because I see it's all just made up. People will think you've become dangerous. They'll think you're going to start robbing banks or hurting people because you no longer believe in moral rules. What they don't understand is that true freedom is not the freedom to hurt. When you really wake up, you see that hurting others is hurting yourself because there is no real separation. The person you hurt is just another part of the same awareness that you are. So naturally, without trying, you treat others with kindness, not because a rule tells you to, but because that's what flows naturally from understanding we're all one. A truly free person follows the meaning of the law while being free of the exact words of the law. They act morally, not out of fear of punishment or hope of reward, but because moral action is simply what happens when you see clearly. They're kind not because kindness is good, but because unkindness would be as strange as punching yourself in the face. But try explaining this to someone who still believes morality comes from outside authority, from God or society or some space rule book. They cannot understand how you can be both free from moral rules and yet act morally. To them it seems like it doesn't make sense. So they assume you're either lying about your freedom or you're secretly bad and just haven't acted on it yet. The awake person learns to follow social rules even while knowing they're rules. They play the game because not playing would create unnecessary problems and confusion. They pay their bills. They follow traffic laws. They treat people with respect not because they must, but because it's simply easier and more peaceful to do so. They're like a master actor who knows it's all a play, but gives their performance everything they've got anyway. So, there you have it. 5 things you must never share if you are spiritually awake. Your direct experience of waking up, your specific practices and methods, your insights about other people, your understanding of emptiness and groundlessness, and your sense of freedom from normal morality. Does this mean you can never talk about spiritual matters? Of course not. But there's a difference between pointing towards something and claiming to have captured it. There's a difference between offering a possibility and demanding a conclusion. The awake person speaks, but they speak lightly. They suggest rather than demand. They invite rather than order. They know that words are fingers pointing at the moon, and they never confuse the finger with the moon itself. And perhaps most importantly, they've learned that the deepest teaching is not in words at all. It's in being there. It's in the way they move through the world. It's in their laugh, their silence, their simple being. People might not understand what you say about waking up, but they can feel when they're in the presence of someone who's awake. They feel it as a kind of peace, a kind of space, a sense that this person is somehow at home in the universe in a way that most people aren't. So be quiet about your waking up. Live it rather than talk about it. And trust that those who are ready to wake up will wake up. Not because you pushed them, but because awareness itself is waking up through all of us. Each in our own time, each in our own way. You're not the one who wakes others. You're just another expression of the waking up that's always already happening. And if someone really wants to know if they really come to you with real curiosity and readiness, then by all means speak. But speak as one hungry person telling another hungry person where to find bread, not as someone who has arrived telling someone else how to get there. Because the beautiful secret is this: there's nowhere to get to. We're already there. We've always been there. We're just playing this wonderful game of pretending we're not.